Hi guys, welcome to Film Companion South. I am Vishal and I'm straight out of a show of Shankar's Indian 2. Unfortunately, it's exactly the movie the trailer promised. It's bigger, it's wider, it's meaner, but it's also way messier. That's it for my short review of the movie. Now we're going into the in-depth review. Watch out for kutti spoilers. Now it's not that Shankar is really known for his subtlety, right? So this is the kind of film that begins with the open credits where you can hear Kamal in his booming voice announce that corruption can cause cancer. It's not smoking, it's not drunken driving, it's not any other kind of warning. It's a movie that starts with that kind of a lofty message. And it's also so strange because if you sit until the end of the movie, you also get the first time that you will ever see a consultant credit for a man who's only teaching you the different varmams. So it's that kind of a movie where everything is 5x, even for a Shankar film. But as we get into the film, as we get into the first 10-20 minutes or so, I realized how, despite understanding the kind of film it's going to be and despite knowing all of Shankar's works, you can still never get tired of the anti-corruption movie. As you get into the first 20 minutes, you see that every single instance in the movie is taking you directly into a case that you remember really strongly. So for instance, you see how a lady needs to pay a big bribe to get the job of a teacher in a particular college. It's already a very Shankar situation, but then when you hear this again, you're thinking of the NEET scam that is going on. Similarly, there's another very cheeky scene that revolves around a particular ceiling that is dropping on a character in the airport, and we're watching this scene 2 weeks after what just happened in an airport in Lucknow and in an airport in Delhi. So this is certainly not the first film to talk about anti-corruption, but because these cases never stop, the relevancy also never stops. And it's also kind of cool how Shankar has thought about taking this particular message to the next generation. So more than the entire movie revolving around the Indian Tata, you have a character like Siddharth and his group of watchdog friends who are taking the entire rebellion onto the internet. In my head, I was thinking of Ajmal's political party in Co. This is pretty much similar to that, except that they have Geo now and internet has become a lot cheaper. And I also like how they've kind of updated the whole battle onto the internet space. So everything is hashtags, everything's about social media, and everything's about taking it to the youngster. Except when you realize how old Indian Tata is, because when he comes back to India in the movie, the first thing he wants to do is go on live. And where does he go on live? On Facebook. Clearly, he's not a youngster anymore. And of course, you can't keep Shankar away from those massive, huge murder scenes. And that's kind of the way he introduces Kamal to us too, in a way in which he goes after a man modeled after somebody like Vijay Mallya. And guess what his company is called? Amit Group. These are some of the cheeky aspects that make the first hour or so of Indian 2 really interesting. And even though you feel like you've seen all this before, there's enough data, there's enough details in the movie to keep you hooked. And this is when the best aspect of the movie really kicks in. For me, the thing with the Shankar movie is there's been so many directors like Murugadas and Atlee who've kind of repeated that template that Shankar kind of started in the 90s. And which is very basic about how you kind of need a savior to come and save you from all the corruption that happens in this world. Even though this movie too is modeled around a vigilante, that too a loved character like Senapathy, it's surprisingly a movie that is anti-vigilante. And it's almost like it's telling its audience to not wait for any savior to come and save you from these miseries. It's like it's telling you to look at home and look around and start the cleanliness process yourself. But what I find strange is how this particular premise is not pushed hard. And it eventually falls into the pattern of the two major vigilante movies Shankar has made before this, which is of course Indian and Onion. So it is within this premise that you get some scenes which are truly original to the Shankar universe. Take for instance a scene where a mother is being asked if she trusts her own son, who is a doctor. She knows how he got the admission and she knows how much he studied to become a doctor. So when a character asks the mother, if you will go to a doctor like your son, it's an amazing scene. And this scene gets another wonderful echo when a son asks his mother if she knows where the 40 saris in her cupboard came from. It's also interesting how the movie confronts corrupt people and their excuse of how they are eventually doing all this for their family, right? But when the family questions them about the same corruption, it gives it another layer, another angle that we've never seen before in a Shankar movie. But eventually, it's these same excellent dramatic ideas that go completely missing from the movie, especially towards the second half. You see Shankar repeating himself in the way how he kind of wants to plan for this huge murder. You've seen it before in 2.0, you've seen it 100 times in Onion, you've seen it 100 times in other movies before this. But the logic is how much torture is enough torture. At least until Onion, there was some sort of a logic to those huge torture scenes, right? Because we have been some way affected by their corruption and we really want them to die a painful death for the revenge to take place. But ever since and even in 2.0, these massive revenge scenes have taken so much time and they involve so many crooked, weird ways of torture that it feels silly after a point. Which is why it's so long and strange when you get a 20-minute stretch that is just a murder that happens inside a golden room. It's like Shankar sitting down in a room and thinking adukku mele and trying to think of a torture scene that is even bigger. So if it's murder in a golden room, it's like, okay, how about we kill this particular villain in a space chamber? None of this makes sense after a point, and these are 20-30 minute stretches in a movie that feels too long. But personally, the most heartbreaking aspect of this movie is how you kind of feel like the Senapathy character gets diluted. For me personally, one of my favorite scenes as Indian is not the kick-ass fight scenes or the songs or the romance or anything of that sort. It's how simply you see Senapathy walk into the corporation office. You know he's a simple guy, he's the kind of guys you see 100 times a day. The fact that he looks like anybody else is the reason he can walk into such an important office room in the middle of the afternoon and still commit a crime. That is a kick-ass idea for a vigilante. The fact that he looks just like any of us. And there is a certain age that you see in the way he walks and the way he talks. But when it comes to Indian 2, or call it the CGI that has gone into it, it's almost like he's aging in reverse and it's not a good thing. And eventually, at least for me, I thought the biggest drawback was how there is no real emotional angle or an emotional connection you feel with any of the characters. Even if you talk about Indian Tata, he has no family in this movie, and even characters like Siddharth, even though he gets a lot of screen time, you don't know him well enough to understand his problems or why he's facing such a big crisis in the second half. And you also find other smaller characters like the one that's played by Simha to be super underwritten. In the first part, you feel like Nedumudi Venu is super intelligent and you're always on your toes because you have a super smart police officer who's always chasing down the Indian Tata. But in this, he makes the biggest, most basic mistakes and you're never really worried for him. On the whole, even though the movie begins super strongly with some amazing ideas in the first half hour, you kind of feel like it's becoming a setup to the third part. At the end of it, I realized how I had walked in as a huge fan of Senapathy, but when I walked out, the only thing I had was apathy. That's it for this review of Indian 2. Tell me what you thought about this review and the movie in the comment section.